Let's talk about the a priori, and in particular the distinction between a priori and a posteriori judgments or statements. A statement is a priori, that is to say prior to something, prior to experience is the idea. An a priori judgment is something I could know independently of any experience of the world. Now maybe in fact I know it on the basis of experience because someone taught it to me, someone explained it to me, someone told me this is a truth of mathematics and so on. But the idea is I didn't need experience. It could be done independently of experience. An a posteriori judgment, on the other hand, requires experience. Here's an example. How many chairs are in the room that I am right now inhabiting? Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, well. Remember, why did I take this example? Chairs are complicated. There's a whole video about that. So there are 4 chairs and a stool, I would say. But if you want to count a stool as a chair, it does have a back and 4 legs. Well, then maybe it's 5. But let's just say 4. Anyway, I had to look around and count. It's not something that is a priori. I can't just say, room, chair. Aha, 4. It's something that requires experience. What color shirt am I wearing? Well, it requires experience to tell that. It's not something you can decide a priori. There are some things, however, that seem to be knowable independently of experience. 1 is 1, for example. Or 1 plus 1 is 2, or 2 times 2 is 4. Those kinds of elementary truths of arithmetic seem to be true independently of experience. I don't have to go out and start counting things. Now I may, to illustrate this, and I'm teaching arithmetic, I may say, look, 2, right? And then suppose I have 2 of those. That's 4. And so I may illustrate in this way, but it doesn't seem to depend on empirical truths. We don't do experiments to find out things in mathematics in that way. It would be very strange to consider a mathematical conjecture and say, well, is this always true? Let's start, I don't know, using grains of sand and counting them. We don't do that. This is something that has to be proved a priori. If I'm thinking about whether the square root of 2 is rational or irrational, I think about it on the basis of, well, what exactly? There are different accounts of mathematical truth. Some will say it's really a matter of moving symbols around. Some will say it's a matter of logic and understanding the logical consequences of certain axioms. Others will say it depends on a kind of mathematical intuition. But whatever's going on here, it is not something that requires experience of the world. And so the point of an a priori judgment is that there are things we could know independently of experience. What are some examples? Well, analytic statements for one. If there are things that are true just by virtue of meanings of terms, it looks like I don't need anything beyond knowledge of my language to know that they're true. I don't need any experience of the world beyond knowledge of language to know that bachelors are unmarried, for example. Logic is like this. So to know that a soul is a soul, I don't actually have to know anything about what a soul is. I can just say, well, whatever they are, they're souls. Okay? And that requires just a knowledge of is, really. So logical truths seem not to require any knowledge of the world. They simply require a knowledge of a few logical bits of language that are quite universal and topic neutral. Is there anything else? This is the question that divides judgment empiricists from judgment rationalists. A judgment empiricist says, no, there's nothing else. The only things are truths of logic and truths by definition. In other words, the only a priori statements are those that are analytic. So an empiricist says these two distinctions, the question of meaning involved in drawing a distinction between the analytic and the synthetic judgments, and this question of knowability that divides the a priori from the a posteriori judgments, those end up coinciding precisely. Rationalists contend that these distinctions do not correspond precisely. They think that there can be synthetic a priori truths. That is to say, truths we could know independently of experience, but that are really giving information about the world, that are not merely verbal, not merely analytic. So the rationalist holds that there are things we can know about the world independently of experience. The empiricist denies it. I've said that an a priori statement is one that we could know independently of experience. But who's this we? Well, what do you mean could know? In principle? Actually, I have a limited memory, I have limited computing capacity, I have a limited lifespan. So presumably there are very long, complicated analytic truths of mathematics, for example, that I could not possibly know. I couldn't know them on the basis of experience or otherwise, actually, because of my own cognitive limitations. Maybe people from ancient times have been doing a calculation, and so I could know on the basis of their results what certain things are, but you might say it's not the kind of thing that anyone could do within one lifetime. So are we talking about finite, limited human beings with our own bounded rational capacities? Are we talking about humanity at large and maybe what we could accomplish given a very long span of time, maybe infinitely long? Are we talking about what God could know? But wait a minute, actually on a traditional conception of God, God can know everything a priori, really. God doesn't have to wait and find out. God is omniscient and knows everything immediately, directly. And so, what exactly are we claiming here? Is it what I can in fact know given my limitations? Is it what I could know in principle if those limitations were removed? There is some unclarity. I think as rationalists and empiricists have traditionally understood this, they mean we, beings like us, rational beings, but with real cognitive limitations, but on the other hand, in principle could know. That is to say, in principle, if our lives were not bounded, if our rational capacities were not bounded, if our memories were not bounded, and so on. In other words, imagine an infinite idealization of a human being, or maybe a body of human beings, a collection of human beings, an infinite collection of human beings, what we would be capable of knowing independently of experience. Now, some philosophers have worried that that sort of infinite generalization of us really in the end doesn't make much sense, and we have no idea what beings like us could in principle know. However all that may be, rationalists and empiricists have found lots to disagree about that is clearly within our own bounds. I think as rationalists and empiricists have traditionally understood these terms, an a priori judgment is one that beings like us, but without our particular limitations, could, in principle, know independently of experience. An a posteriori judgment is one that beings like us, but without our limitations, would have to know on the basis of experience if they could know them at all.